War Thunder has always been a War Thunder problem, and whilst the focus in the game is top tier and high-ranking vehicles, sometimes I wish that Gaijin just took a step back and focused on higher quality maps, or sound design, and the various other things that is wrong with War Thunder. But regardless of the trend of dripping in content slowly and adding vehicles mainly to top tier and sprinkling a few World War II things in between, I doubt if all, Gaijin will change their focus on top tier, as it's a great way for them to make money. Regardless, I wanted to make a list of vehicles that should be in War Thunder. Since there are a heap of options still available, it's probably only due time before we see some of the tanks mentioned in this list either as premiums, rare events, or in the regular tech trees in due time. Furthermore, I should note that I've seen quite a few of these videos by other fantastic creators, many of which I hold in high regard because, well, it's the passion behind these fascinating vehicles and their unique history that should be remembered. And if it's one thing War Thunder is good at, it's showing us a glimpse of history for us to then discover and learn about our favourite things and search for more. Anyway, let's get straight into it. The first vehicle I'm going to mention here is a bit controversial in its own right. The Bob Semple is certainly a fantastic vehicle. Whether or not it'd be useless in War Thunder is another subject altogether. I did make a video about that one, you can see that one here. I still think that it'd be a fantastic event as a whole for an April Fool's or what have you, but in saying that, I don't see it would probably have any other use aside from just a one-off event. You could make an argument for a 8-bit style retro-themed thing, considering the impact that the Bob Semple has had on War Thunder, but that's a side subject altogether. Moving on, the second vehicle I'd like to see is the ever-famous BT-42, a fantastic tank that is based on a BT chassis that has a howitzer in the hull. It's probably most notable for being in Girls and Panzer. It's been a fan favourite for a very long time. And I mean, who doesn't want a finished vehicle that is a BT-7 basically strapped with a 114mm gun on the chassis? Yeah, exactly. Now, in general, I'd like to see more armoured cars in War Thunder as a whole, and that's why I'm proposing that this time, well, there's no bias here, but the Rhino Heavy Armoured Car. Essentially, it's an Australian upgrade of a Dingo. It didn't really go too far. The Commonwealth really developed its own armoured fighting vehicles. It's armed with a QF 2-pounder 40mm Mark II, secondary millimeter machine gun, 7.7s, nothing too generic. 8.5 tons, essentially what this vehicle weighed, and it was made in 1942. Again, 2 prototypes. It'd be good as an event vehicle, but also relatively fun because Britain kind of needs that manoeuvrability, even though it's got heaps of vehicles. It'd be a fun event vehicle nonetheless, and as much as I love armoured cars, there are so many to cover, I'm probably going to have to do a separate video on that one. But let's not mention the AEC armoured car, the first prototype version. Yeah, it looks spooky. Moving on to self-propelled anti-air, and there's a heap of categories that I could pick. I ultimately chose one style vehicle just because it has many different variants and armament types. This is the Mobilwagen. Based off the Panzer IV chassis, armour 10mm to 80mm, main armament is a 3.7mm flak gun. But again, it is pretty interesting because they mounted several different types of armaments. There's ones with 20mm, there's one with quad Wirbelwind mounts. I think that'd be interesting to see to fill out the German tech tree. Not that they need it, not that Wirbelwind's already cancerous enough as is, but this probably provides a bit of a level playing base just for the fact that you can't depress downwards with some of these chassis just because it's a flat platform built upon a Panzer IV. So it could be an equally interesting vehicle and probably only effective for taking out anti-air. Regardless to say that this is probably the only vehicle on this list that will probably be a main battle tank. Brazil developed some interesting stuff, and their main battle tank, the MB3 Tamoyo, or the Bernardi, I can't even pronounce the fucker. Let's just say it's a Brazilian main tank. It reached production status in 1983. And, well, it got upgraded. Essentially, it was armed with a 90mm gun and carried 68 rounds of ammunition. It was based off the US M41 Bulldog, but then had been upgrading for the Brazilian Armed Forces. Had a new diesel engine, modified electrical system, night sights, laser finder, side skirts, additional space armor, and a whole heap of other different things. So you have a 90mm cannon with 2 MGs, with a general top speed of 67 kilometers an hour. I think it'd be a fantastic addition somewhere in War Thunder. Maybe in a off-axis tree or a South American tree, for example. But hell, who am I going to debate? This is a strange-looking vehicle. And let's not mention the Frankenstein that is the Stuart, which has been upgraded for the Brazilian army. Yeah, that thing is cursed out of all hell. Continuing with the light tank theme, this is the Panzer 61. It's a Switzerland main battle tank, although it's technically a second generation main battle tank, and it just looks fantastic. Designed in 1950, serviced from 1965 to 67, they built 150 of these things. It has a Royal Ordnance L7, two 7.5mm machine guns, and regardless of what tech tree this thing could possibly go in, 55 kilometers an hour or 34 miles an hour top speed is fantastic nevertheless. Before we get on to the rest of the list, let me know in the comments down below what vehicles you would like to see in War Thunder and why. That'll be a good challenge for you to come up with a list of 5 vehicles. Otherwise, let's get straight on with the next set of tanks. Now, to throw my dual citizen into the mix, we've already mentioned the Bob sample, but we wouldn't be a complete video without mentioning the Australian cruiser tank Mark III, or the Thunderbolt. Now, the Thunderbolt we see in game is vastly different from the one that was actually produced, although that is the Mark IV version, not the Mark III version. Mark III essentially was a heavy tank with a heap of different specifications. It was a 65mm front hull, sides and rear were 45mm, the turret was 65, and it held a 25-pounder tank gun with 120 rounds. Now, the 25-pounder was notable because it was basically a howitzer that was available, but it could fire, obviously, anti-tank ammunition. Now, in order to get the 17-pounder into the turret of the Mark IV, they tested a version of the Thunderbolt which had two 25-pounders side by side. And if we're going to go that far, we may as well go back to the AC Mark I. Essentially, it has a 2-pounder gun with 130 rounds and two 7.7mm machine guns. Suffice to say, you're getting 3 versions of a tank, possibly 4 that could be all used as event vehicles or premiums or even in-tree vehicles for whatever reason. And for that, I think it's worthy of its addition, essentially. It should be in the game by now. That's all I'm saying. No Australian bias at all. No. Special mention needs to be said for the next vehicle on this list. Essentially, it's a very strange. You ready for this one? Look at that beautiful bastard. That is the Target Tank 68. Essentially what that is a Panzer 68 which was converted to a target vehicle role, and a total of 10 of those were made. It kind of gives me the giggles when looking at that thing. However, it does remind me of Japanese heavy tank prototype vehicles like the OIs and whatever. But let's not go there, that's a separate subject altogether. Could see this thing as a event vehicle, as a April Fool's event purely, and that's about it. Now, for other notable mentions, I'd also like to mention the Combat Engineer Vehicle, CEV T118E1. Essentially, you've got a howitzer mounted on the front of a vehicle that is fascinating in some regards, but also really comparable to that of other vehicles that people would like to see. For example, the Churchill AVRE. The next vehicle on the list, which is basically a Matilda Hedgehog. Yes, don't adjust your headsets, that is a Matilda, an Australian Matilda, mounted with essentially anti-submarine warfare mortar launchers. Again, used very sparingly, didn't use it to particular success. They put them on the back of a ship, particularly destroyers or frigates or lightly armoured transports. Rumours have it that it will be added to the game as a end-of-year event vehicle, but it's just that, rumours at this stage. I'd also like to pass and mention that why hasn't Britain gotten the Scorpion light tanks? There's so many different variants that deserve its own video, but we're sticking with the trend of light tanks now, and the last vehicle on the list is the Norwegian Super Chaffee, also known as the NM116. Essentially what you get when you put a 90mm gun in the turret of a M24 Chaffee, give it some thermals and other electronic-based stuff, and you get something that looks like it's out of a 1970s future film. Either way, it's just a Chaffee that's been up-armoured, really. And I know there are other versions of different South American tanks that are out there with ERA, and they look completely cursed. I did mention a couple earlier in this video. But there's too much to really look at to say, oh yes, this is what needs to come to War Thunder, because in reality, there are still a heap of vehicles without focusing at the top end and filling in the lower end where is needed. Light tanks, armoured cars, patrol vehicles, even the 2-pounder Bren carrier, or Bren gun carrier. That'd be fantastic to see, hey? There's so many options. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. This is a very quick video. My name is Ash, and I'll catch you in the next one. Alrighty, cheerio. Bye-bye.